Shall we? Shall we? Can you please move forward to the first rows? I am Italian indeed. And so? Okay, thanks a lot for being here with us this afternoon for the very last session of this Congress. My name is Nicola Pranzini. I am Italian, as you might have heard. Thank you, Steve. And I will be facilitating a bit this panel discussion. But first of all, let me introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Kirsty Brown, Chief Commissioner of Scout Australia, Queensland branch, and consultant to the Asia Pacific Scout Committee. Stephen Peck from UK, Director of Program and Development of the Scout Association. Joran Hagendahl from Sweden and Director for Scouting's Development at the World Scout Bureau Central Office. And John Maina Kiranga from Botswana/Kenya, who has been working for 20 years with young people, and he was the camp chief for the MUT in Kenya some years ago. Thanks again for being here today. As you know, we are going to address this very important issue today, determining the last common denominator for Scouting. Basically, what we're going to do is to challenge the panelists and you participants to find a definition that could better express the essence of what is Scouting today, by exploring different elements that are at the core of Scouting, purpose, values, and methods, and how they are reflected in the current worldwide reality. It's going to be a critical but constructive debate based on the respect for all the different opinions at what unite us all as Scouts in this modern context, with the final aim to strengthen our movement. The Constitution of WSEC is very clear on what are the essentials, but at the same time, history is showing that in order to guarantee the unity of the movement, a quite generous range of flexibility has always been applied to NSOs and NSAs that have been quite significantly amending some of the fundamentals of Scouting. We all understand very much the need to adapt to the different realities around the world, but how much can the fundamental characteristics of Scouting be stretched? What is the core, the non-negotiable of Scouting? Before giving the floor to our speakers, I would like to remind that, as usual during this conference, they are speaking on their personal capacity and not representing their organizations, nor offices or regions. So with the aim to look together for new expressions of our unity here, I give the floor to Kirsty, and thank you very much again for being here.
World Scouting is a multifaceted and highly valued. It is based on a proud history of a value-based youth leadership program. It is successful in 2013 as it was at its inception in 1907. Of Scouting's successful features, which is least common? I will argue that this must depend on each NSO and where it is on the continuum of being a responsive youth development movement that meets the needs of young people. The least common denominator will be different for each NSO, and this will vary at different times based on the needs of the community. I commence my input into the discussion by reminding us all that the Constitution of WSEC states clearly that Scouting is an educational movement. The Constitution of WSEC states the purpose, the principle, and method of the Scout movement. They represent the common denominators that link all member organisations of WSEC and express the mission that Scouting seeks to fulfil. The purpose, principles, or method have over time shown that they're perfectly valid, but this panel will challenge each of you into an in-depth thinking process to gain a greater understanding of these aspects in light of today's realities. I challenge you to consider how these fundamental elements have been interpreted and applied in your own National Scout organisation, taking into account the socio-cultural conditions which prevail in societies to which you belong. The Constitution, we invite you to look beyond appearances, your established ways, and consider, sorry, I just hit the wrong button. We invite you to look beyond appearances, your established ways, and consider, is Scouting still voluntary? Educational movement for young people, and whose purpose is to contribute to the development of young people. So what does that really mean? It is widely accepted that this part of the definition in the Constitution is where everyone is in agreement. However, these terms do not have the same meaning from one part of the world to another, from one association to another. So what did BP mean by the words education and voluntary and the notion of developing young people? And are these meanings the same in 2013 as they were in 1907? We talk of the importance of the continuity of the insights of BP, that Scouting must continue to be a movement that must be real and responsive to meet the needs of young people in every country of the world. Therefore, there must be flexibility within the parameter of conformity. The Charter of the World Scout Committee is to ensure this. The Constitution sets the non-negotiables. These are basic. They must be common. These non-negotiables make Scouting unique and authentic. Some regions and some NSOs have added to these in response to the needs of their countries. This is commendable and reflects the flexibility nature of Scouting. However, we must remember that there are a number of developing countries that are not yet full members. And in these countries where Scouting is being developed and grown, the basics of Scouting, the non-negotiables, are the common starting point. The Constitution governs the operation of WSEC. The preamble identifies the kindred spirit of the world cooperation and friendship. BP highlighted the need for a kindred spirit of the world, cooperation and friendship. We must remember and be guided by his notions today, as these are really needed. So on this foundation, what are the non-negotiables? What are the common denominators? Article 1 defines the definition of the movement. I won't read it all to you. I know you should all be able to relate it as being the voluntary, non-political, educational movement, etc. You all understand what the purpose of the Scout movement is. It's listed in all our constitution and in the most organisations, to contribute to the development of young people in achieving their physical, intellectual, emotional, social and spiritual potentials. By looking at the Constitution, and in particular the definition, Article 1, this is the only non-negotiables of the Scout movement, and they're identified as 3 tenets: the purpose, the principle, and the methods. These are linked to the universal Scout salute that each of us make. Therefore, it could be argued everything else except these are the lesser common denominators. They have been added as extras. Rightly so, to support the NSO to be responsive to the needs of young people in the different parts of the world. Some examples of different denominators that have been added are community-based scouting, the local community needing and valuing and taking responsibility for scouting. Some NSOs say scouting is so important everyone should be given the chance to join, and we expand this unlike other NSOs which offer the Scout program in community groups who see it meets the local need and they sponsor Scouting. Here in Hong Kong, it is the schools that who see that Scouting is needed in their schools as a value-added part of their program. In other NSOs, we have community-based Scouting as where it occurs rather than who sponsors, auspices and takes responsibility and ownership. In these situations, the leader goes to a new town and they must seek a person to become the leader or the sponsor and support them to start the group rather than what happens in Hong Kong. We have school Scouting, the recognition of the value of Scouting. Should we only go to locations where an existing community has an established entity? Should we shift the parameters and the paradigms and not market Scouting externally, but only internally so that we promote its benefits and let our successes spread so other existing entities see the benefits and buy our program? Scouting has to be adapted to the local conditions. But to adapt this, we need to know what it is we're adapting. If not, we end up creating something new that is different from the original intention. We must take into account the specific characteristics of each culture. If we want Scouting to be one movement, we need to agree on what the key words mean to us and where we stand in relation to what is authentic Scouting. What are the conditions that we need to ensure in order not to lose the specific identity of our movement?
Thank you, Kirsty. Now the floor is for Steve, addressing the principle of Scouting. You need a mic, or you come here?
I just want to share a few thoughts about the principles of Scouting, and in particular the elements of our constitution, which talk about duty to God, duty to self, and duty to others. The first, obviously, duty to God. I'm going to press the button now. Look at that. Duty to God is perhaps the most controversial in many of our discussions around the principles of Scouting. We have to ask ourselves, what does our God expect of us? Is it just duty, or is it about a loving, respectful relationship between God and the person? And does the word duty really sum up that relationship as we begin to understand it today? The other words that seem to be missing here are about spiritual development. We just talk about God. We don't talk about a journey of development, of finding a spiritual reality that suits us and our value base. And actually a simple phrase such as duty to God may not summarize that understanding that we have as we come to know it, and the way we, as Kirsty was referring to, as we've come to apply it in our associations. So does this phrase really unify the movement, or does it separate it? Do we need to think of a different way of expressing what we mean here? The other thing that makes me uncomfortable about this is that we have a phrase which is duty to God, which is used to exclude people. That if people don't believe in a God, they are excluded from Scouting. If Scouting is about a journey and a journey to faith, why do we exclude people who don't have a faith currently? We accept that young people in lots of other aspects of our program rebel against the norms of society. They rebel against authority. They may rebel against their established religion and therefore go through a phase or come to an understanding that they don't have a faith. And if we exclude them, are we excluding them from helping us, from us helping them on their journey to a spiritual reality that may not be one that we understand? I'm uncomfortable with the view of excluding people just because they proclaim not to believe in God. We also exclude adults who don't have a faith. Do we do that because we don't believe that without a faith you can't help young people explore their own spiritual reality and their own faith? Maybe we should be more inclusive. Maybe we should be thinking more of saying, rather than a duty to God, we should be finding a phrase which encompasses that journey to spiritual development, and not have something that is so simplistic as a duty to a God who may want a loving relationship with us. Just some thoughts there. I can see lots of people going. Duty to others is often typified as service in our community. And many Scouts consider they are undertaking their duty to others by undertaking service projects. However, if we are about creating a better world, and we're all walking around with polo shirts on written about creating a better world, do we need to find a phrase which encompasses a more proactive approach to creating that better world, rather than simply doing our duty in our communities by undertaking rather passive service projects? Is it about duty, or are we about creating something? How far should we go to fight injustice? How far should we go to create that better world? How far should we go to take a political stance on some things and challenge the reality, rather than simply undertaking service in our local communities? In my own association, we're having a discussion at the moment about the very proxy nature of service to others, where we consider that fundraising is somehow serving others. But surely that's not. Our young people don't learn anything from that type of service in their community. They simply raise money, give it to someone else who then goes and does something. If we don't have a far more involved and active approach to working with other people, what do our young people learn from simply undertaking service? What do they learn from simply clearing up litter in their communities? Would their time be better spent by actively campaigning in their community that means that the litter doesn't get dropped in the first place? We have to ask ourselves, do we want to use this passive phrase as we go forward in the future? Or do we want something that is more active, implies a greater involvement in our communities? We want to change the world. If our young people want to change the world, should we be encouraging them to do that? For me, the simple analogy is, do we put in a Band-Aid, or do we find a cure to the ills of society? And to me, service projects are like a Band-Aid. They're not a cure. And maybe we need to find a different form of words that it implies we're looking, we're helping, we're being part of the cure. My final point is about duty to self. Duty to self is often expressed or perceived as being expressed in our program as helping young people understand their bodies and understand some sort of healthy lifestyle. But in here, are we talking about our personal values? I thought he was leaving there. Are we talking about our personal values? If we're talking about health, some believe, for instance, you can't smoke and drink and be a Scout. I leave you with that thought, because there are some people who perhaps don't allow themselves to smoke or drink when they're in a uniform, but when they're out of a uniform, they're happy to smoke and drink. Is that hypocritical? There's some embarrassed faces in the room already, I see. And what about young people and leaders who are obese? If we exclude leaders who don't believe in God, why don't we exclude leaders who clearly do not have a healthy lifestyle? It's a serious question, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So there are some things here that we need to question. If we're talking about duty to yourself, are we talking about a journey of personal development? Are we talking about a commitment to continuous improvement in our lives? I come back to the journey. How do we demonstrate these things? How do we demonstrate that young people are on a journey and that we welcome young people who are on that journey towards many of these things that I've just referred to there? So in summary, I'll leave you with a few thoughts on this aspect. One is that we seem to treat these three aspects of our so-called constitution in three completely different ways. We put priorities in different places. We exclude people who blatantly say, I don't hold those values. But we allow other people who equally clearly don't hold those values in some other way. So shouldn't we put equal emphasis on there? Should we use this to exclude people from Scouting, or should we find a form of words and a way of operating that includes people who want to come on the journey with us, both young people and adults? That if young people want to commit to be on that journey, then actually we should welcome them in and help them find that journey. We should be open to all. We shouldn't reject people, would be my view. So we need to find a wording to reflect that. I'm not pretending I know the answers. What I do know is I think we have a problem with a very black and white, very rigid form of words that we knew that we use at the moment. I would also say that we need to find an active, journey-filled phrases that encourage us to look at that journey of young people, that journey of personal development towards faith, towards health, towards understanding themselves, and not just simply this passive instructional duty phrase that we use at the moment. I'll leave you with those thoughts.
What should I do? Yeah. I can go. I need to run a little bit now to lose a couple of kilos. How long time do I have, Steve?
Don't ask me, he's the chair.
No, to lose weight. There is a common understanding that the more you know about something, the better you understand it. I actually believe the opposite sometimes. The more I think about these questions, the less secure I am, the less sure I am that I understand it or that I am right or wrong. The promise and the law, we tend to see that in one way as a constant, and that it's not really important. I had to make some slides. I don't even know if they're the same what I'm talking about. So maybe it's better I stand in front of them. So don't focus on the slides, really. Focus on me. The more I think about it, the more complicated it becomes. Okay, I will move. Yeah. In the World Scout Committee, since I don't know how long, but in the start of every meeting, we read a promise together. And at these occasions, I'm reminded of that this isn't so simple. Because for me, for my friend from Denmark and Norway, we are finished much faster than everyone else in the room. It takes a third of the time for us to do our promise than for the rest of the room, because we have a different promise. We have the same, the Dane and the Norwegian and I, but we don't have the same promise as the rest of the room. And that every time I do that, it reminds me that this isn't so simple, it isn't the same, it is a variation, it is a moving thing. I can start to ask you, now there are some real experts here, but how many points are there in the Scout law? How many points are there in the Scout law? Now, give me an answer. Don't think so much, just answer. How many? There are 10? 7? How many? Yeah. In Hong Kong there are 10. In Hong Kong there are 7. In Denmark? 7, 8-ish. I can always trust my Scandinavian friends. If something isn't confused when you start, bring in a Dane. Thank you. How many is there in the Constitution? There's 10. How many was it in Baden-Powell's original Scout law? 10? 10? 10? Do you want to bet money on that, Anthony? No, it was 9-ish. It's not even clear. You can say it's 9, you can say it's 10. Both is right. I mean, it's scary, isn't it? It's actually not easy when you read today to say if it is 9 or 10 points in Baden-Powell's original Scout law. I would say it's 9.5. My point is that the Scout law, we think that it's like the fixed star that we navigate around, the law and the promise. And I think it isn't really. It isn't a fixed star. It's a moving target adopted to culture. I think it says in the Constitution that you are able to adopt it according to your language and culture. And it isn't a fixed star. It's something that moves around a little bit. Then I would like you to go in and read the texts that are in the Constitution. Do that when you come home, and then reflect on that text and compare that to the discussions you have been involved with during these days. And then mail me and tell me if you think the text in the Constitution reflects the thoughts and the ideas that has been discussed during these 3 days. I happen to think that there are parts in this text that doesn't reflect what we have talked about, what we have discussed, and what we have agreed on or not agreed on. Just a thought for your mind. Do that when you come home. Read the text and compare it to what you have experienced here. I also want to ask you, do the law define our values? Do you think the law defines our values? Or is the law a consequence of our values? The later. It's a consequence of our values. I agree with you. I think it's a consequence of our values. Then we need to really discuss our values and then write the law. And we need to do that every 10 or 15 years. Go back, see what our values are, believe in our heart, and then make a text that actually fits that value system, not the other way around. I also want to think, how often do we use the Scout law, not only as a ritual, not only but actually as a starting point for a discussion, not an end of a ceremony, but to start a meeting with young Scouts in the forest, talk about values. How often do we use the Scout law as that starting point? I would argue, I don't know, maybe all of you do it. I have not a big experience in that. And when I started to think about that was something I thought about. We talk a lot about values. I've been around, I was in one seminar here, we talked about the campfire as a metaphor for learning and the tradition of campfires. And around the campfire, for me, it's the perfect place to talk about values with young people. But very rarely that discussion starts in the Scout law. And I don't know why. In a perfect world, it should start in the Scout law for me, more often. So I would like to see a modern, value-based Scout law that actually are used in our educational program as a starting point for discussions about values. I couldn't stay out of thinking a little bit about the least common denominator. Do all these, when we talk about we define what is Scouting. And we seem to be wanting to have an answer to that. We are asking ourselves, we are discussing it. I think that's good. I think the discussion is really, really good. I'm a little bit scared, too, that if we find these least common denominator, they can define us, and I hang on to what Steve talked about. They can be very excluding instead of including. I mean, we want to be a broad worldwide movement in 195 countries. We want to be 100 million members. We need a value-based base, but we don't want it to be excluding, and that's the trick. If we do it too vague, we are meaningless. If we don't have a value-based system in the bottom, so why gather 100 million people? I mean, Barcelona Football Club, they have 100 million members or something like that around the world that wears their T-shirts and so on. And I'm sorry if there is any, you are here. For a Catalan, it's a value-based organization. For the rest of the world, it actually isn't. And we could, of course, be 100 millions if we found the ticks and give. No, I'm not saying that. I think it's important to have the values. The least common denominators needs to be there, but they shouldn't be excluding, they should be including, so we can reach as many as possible to this. And sometimes I think about this, the least common denominator. I tried to test these ideas with a couple of friends, and they really looked confused, but I will try it. I think you are smarter than they were. It isn't that difficult, really. I think about it like a cloud. You have a cloud of values. And then we adhere to them. Say there are 20 values. And I adhere very strongly to 7. I think also Steve's thought about that we are, without knowing it really, we are sorting them in orders of importance. And sex and God nearly always comes on top. That's always on the top. And then there are other things that are less. We don't exclude people because they are fat. We can have a value that we want people to not be fat, but we rarely exclude them because they are fat. But if they don't believe in God, there's the door. So we are sorting them in some way. But I would like to see a cloud of values. And what would unite us was that we would share this cloud. But some of us wouldn't share all in the cloud. And some of us, do you see what I mean? Maybe you're not smarter than my friends. Or I'm really stupid. Thank you.
Thank you, Joran, for this very interesting and and fun insight as well. Mina, please. And Mina is going to explore the realities of the implementation of the Scout method nowadays. Thanks a lot.
Very interesting debate. You know, when I saw the topic, the least common denominator, I went to look for the definition in mathematics. It was not so clear. It's like, what cuts across in all aspects of scouting? If I come to Hong Kong, it will be there. If I go to Kenya, it will be there. That's why I began. It's only that when I sat together with my friends, then I started realizing the definition of what we were looking for was very, very different. So I'll pose a few questions, not that I have answers, but I find them a little interesting if I pose them as questions for discussion. Too long, eh? Whoever can read this in a minute, you are talented. So don't bother. It's a mouthful when you start looking at Scout method. When I sat on the presentation, I said, yeah, assume I was tweeting a Scout method, and I was to use very few words. How many characters? 140, 160? Okay? Progressive scheme. Now we are right at the method. Progressive. Okay? Of learning by doing, using the patrol system. First point, progressive, moving from one side. Sorry. Follows promise and law. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Okay? With that symbolic framework. Good, I'm the last one that I'll repeat a few of the things which my colleagues have talked about. And lastly, best outdoors is youth-centered with adult support. Let's look at each of those elements. Two sides, as it is today, what it should be. The patrol system, the magic number. What was the magic number? 8? I asked there, does size matter? Who came with 8? What will have happened if the patrol was 7, 4, 3, 2? Does it matter? Maybe it mattered then. I don't know whether it matters now. Does it? And to remember this, I put it in a dial. If you have your phone and you have the dial 1, 2, 3 up to 9, I put that as number 8, the patrol system. I wanted, if I was to talk to young people, I wish you are younger than you are today, but think about the phone dial, your mobile phone. You look at the number 8. So that's what I wanted to know. Could it change? Are we comfortable? Yeah? Learning by doing. Yeah, you have to do to learn. We had today's keynote address. Activity. We learn when we do. But then there's been a lot of modernization. I wanted to make some Chinese cooking the other day. I called my daughter and I said, can we get to YouTube? She said, yes, Dad. We looked at the ingredient very quickly. Got the flour, got everything. My daughter is only 8. Yeah? And by the time my wife came back home, we had some very nice cooking. She was surprised. We had some dumplings. We had never done them in my countries. Like there they were. Even she was asking, where did you get the minced pork? She'd never seen it. But we did it. Did we learn by doing? We had never done it before. We went very quickly to the YouTube and we learned. So let's look at the method. Maybe a few things have changed. Maybe we could change. Yeah? Maybe we could have an app for learning. And they are there. Still talking about method. Progressive scheme. You know? You begin, you climb. And we talked about how people learn. I attended John It's John who? I thought John Jr. and it was John Sr. today about the issue of learning. Where do you begin? Are you in class A, B, or C? Are you a quick learner? Because sometimes we keep people in a place, they want to be up. I know when I introduced the first HIV badge we had a project in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. It was called Scouting for Solutions. The late Major Murugu, who was in charge of the African region, challenged me and told me, no, Maina, this one badge is not progressive. What will happen to the young one? What will happen once I've learned everything I need to learn? Then I said, okay, I'll put 1 star. You learn a little more, you get 2nd star. The same badge. You get a little more. So let's start thinking about this issue of progressive scheme. Promise and law. You've heard now. Are we on version 1.1? 2.1? You know? Okay. Think about Apple. Think about, you see, versions have changed. But here we have looked at the law as though it has been static. But happy to hear people are changing it in different territories. But when we meet in forums, I don't know whether we'll be practicing the same scouting. It's a challenge when we meet. And I've seen that the dynamism of scouts, when we meet from Africa, Asia, Europe, we start facing challenges. Because what you call your promise is not what the other side calls a promise. And when we meet in such a gathering, we start realizing, we subscribe to a different promise to what you subscribe to. So as you change in the regions, we need to start thinking about the version so that if you're upgrading, might we need to upgrade all of us so that what you have in the, on the Apple phone is the same thing you have on your computer. Symbolic framework. I had nothing to put there. That's what I was wondering. Can we call a spade a spade? Yeah? In my country, they'll easily call you the worshipper. When you love those symbolism, they'll say, what they don't understand, when you bring so many symbols, they say, you see, Maina, this must be a devil worshipper. And somebody learned it the hard way. You know, the sign for the doctors started a hospital, he had the sword, he had the snake, and then people came and said, yeah, when you go there, you'll not live their life. Why? You saw the snake around there? It means when you go there, you'll die. Symbolism, okay? Life and nature, okay? It is just the other day when I was here, I was told that, who was talking about it being very difficult for people to see sunshine in Hong Kong? That you go somewhere, you'll not know whether the sun rises from east to west. We have concrete jungle, yeah? Can there be scouting out in these concrete jungles? I had a challenge when we had the moot in Nairobi. We started saying, we don't have enough of this old outdoor we used to have before. We have crazy public transport we call matatu, small minibus, very colored with a lot of music. We said, that's the scouting, the modern scouting now. When you come to Nairobi, you will not have the type of transport you have here. We want to make you survive in a transport system which looks so chaotic, but you'll enjoy by getting where you are going. Yeah? So still looking at the methods, where are we? Life and nature. Because nature is changing. In fact, as I sat there, I started looking at bonsai garden. What do you call those nice small trees you can put in your house? Yeah? Bonsai. Relationship. Am I going too fast? I'm at the end. Only 5 minutes. That's good, Relationship between adults and young people. We were talking about participation the other day. It was just yesterday. And we started looking at issues around adultism, where we adults feel like here we are deciding what types of things we should change for the young people to enjoy. Does the person who pay the piper call the tune, you know? Adult support, yeah? Whether it's our parents, whether it's scout leaders, whether they're establishment. So I was looking at that relationship. At what level does a scout enjoy what they want to hear most? As we sat in the room today, listening to the keynote address, there was a young person who asked from the back, where should our dreams go? How do we tie our dreams with the dream of our fathers or mothers? Yeah? Because the dreams of our mothers and fathers are so different from our dreams. But if they pay the school fees and the college fee, you'll have to borrow a dream like I did when I was young. When I was just 4 or so, I used to hear my mother and the other women talk about their dreams. Oh, I dreamt I was in the garden, and then I was confused. I'll tell my mother, Mom, what did I dream? Then she said, I don't know. Then I'll cry. Then say, oh, don't worry, don't worry. You dreamt you're in the train. You are moving from point A to point B. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maina. I hope you are as much inspired and confused as me. We kindly invite you now to discuss a bit about what you heard, about the key elements, the definition, the purpose, the principles, and the method. and try to identify what are the keywords that would better define what is scouting nowadays. What would be the keywords to identify the current definition of scouting? We have 20, let's say 20 minutes for this. So just try to group in 4 or 5 people. I know it's very short, but that's the time we have been given. So please start immediately, group in 4 or 5, maybe not from the same country, to discuss. And then of course, we will open the floor for your inputs, questions, and requests of clarification to our speakers. Thanks a lot. I, of course, invite the online participants to do the same. So, community online leader, please. Thank you. Shall we go back? Okay, sorry, the time is over. I know you are very passionate about the discussion. Sorry. Can I have your attention, please? Don't be so passionate. Just listen. I'm special, you know. Please, at the back of the room, can you hear me? Can you please stop discussing now? Anna Ruth, please. I know it's you. Hello. Hello. So, let me say that we are sorry that we have so little time. Are you sure you are listening? Because I'm not. I will just simply start now and ask some of the group to come and report. I'm saying, if you listen, that we are very sorry that the time is so short, but the purpose of this exercise, the one you did and the one they did, is just not to solve the issue now. Is to start the reflections. But this is a great occasion to already gather some great ideas from them and from you. So that is why we would like you now to come, one per each group, to share the keywords. Please don't start with long discussions, just use the keyword you have identified. After this, because this will go in the computer of our rapporteur, and they will be very useful. After this, there will be the floor open for questions to our panelists, or for burning issues you want to discuss. So, first group. As always, please, you know well.
I have to remember the green dot. Okay, keywords. We had a number of keywords: education, empowerment, citizenship, youth development, self-development, values, journey, movement, leadership, change agent, and commitment.
That's easy, you see. They will be noted somehow. Okay, who's next? Who's next, please? We really need to be on time.
We actually got on a bit of a debate about the whole big picture. Yep. We got onto a bit of a debate about the whole big picture, so we were trying to solve the world. But some of the words that did come out was fun, education, lifetime learning, process, life skills, building relationships, learning by doing, rules for life, and tradition.
Thank you very much. What? You are mmming. Okay. Who is next? You are. Thank you.
Our group had some very exciting discussion as we were challenged by the questions that the presenter made to us. And we were looking at the whole movement as a journey rather than a destination. We look at making the language cool, because you know with what it is with our young people today. We are looking at we come up with initiative, youth development, spiritual development, personal development.
Thank you. Excellent. No one else? It feels like okay. Good. So don't worry, there will be then after this time for express your internal struggles.
Okay, very briefly. Our key points were don't change the values, stroke principles. What we could do is advocate or articulate the why much better than we're doing now. When it comes to the how of scouting and the what of scouting, we should be a bit more flexible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there is still someone that, if you feel like, so apparently there are no more, okay? From Norway.
Actually, I'm Håvard from Norway. Actually, we had a really good discussion on many other things. So we didn't came to the words, but we just, let's add friendship and fellowship. And I would like to continue the discussion with my group afterwards, because this was really interesting sharing from Australia, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. So
that's great. Sorry? Fellowship. Done.
We also avoided sticking to the rules and didn't come up with single words. None of you seem surprised. I wanted to refer to the concepts that we were discussing, and in so much as I will do that, I will refer to some words. So we thought that maybe lowest common denominator perhaps isn't the right concept. Perhaps actually the right concept is highest common factor. So what are the maximum number of things that we can all agree on that reflect scouting? Yeah, rather than the minimum spec, if you like. So that's the first one. Whoa. And the second one is around the sort of nature of constitutions themselves, in that they tend to prescribe, or they have a tendency towards prescription. And there was an observation made that at the global level, actually, what happens is description. We have a description of a promise, of a law that our founder had in the first place, that acts as a baseline for us. It doesn't prescribe a scout law to us in our own national organizations. We're to find the right expression for scout principles in the scout laws that exist in each of our own national contexts. So prescription versus description, and in with that, the question of how we can embrace a more plural view about what scouting should be. How do we encompass the sort of latitude that describes the very diverse experience of scouting that we all have, the very diverse reality of scouting, in documents like constitutions, which by their nature tend towards making us be very precise. How do we embrace latitude in there? So there was just some questions and some observations from us.
Excellent. Please. Yeah, thanks a lot.
I think that what we tried to do was a big challenge, because it is not easy to define the smaller common denominator of scouting. But I think it's quite impossible if we take each element of a definition, for example, the methods, or one by one, because scouting is an educational system. So you have to use system thinking to enter into it and to find the smaller common denominator. If not, it's just a game of words, and you cannot achieve anything, I'm afraid.
That's a good point. But I remind to all of us that this is just a starting point. This is not meant to be the end point of the discussions. But that's a very good remark. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you very much. From South Sudan, the question, what is a scout? We define it as it is a voluntary movement, non-political, open for all. And with the section which we took a long time in discussion is the duty to God and duty to the self. It was a problem to the group. Because we thought that by changing that idea which has gone for 100 years, it will take Scout to divisions. Because Muslims are saying there is no God but Allah. Then me, myself, in our country we call God as Moon. Then I will say there is no Allah but there is Moon. That is how we are going to separate ourselves. By this one, we thought that it needs a very good debate. And we come together. It is for us to harmonize to see what shall we put better than self. Because if we said self, then that is not God. That is something else. And it will, something big will happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, we still have 15 minutes. Edward, I know you want to say something. After Edward, we will open the floor and for questions maybe to the panelists. Of course, you all want to say something, but please remind that they are also here to answer your questions.
Thank you. I agree with Dominic that this is a very broad thing, right? And maybe the title is a little bit tricky. Maybe the title is "Let's start thinking about ourselves" or "Let's rethink ourselves." So, to me, there is an important thing of what Jordan was saying. This idea of whether the law is dictating our values or the values are creating the law, which is that, on my view, what is on the core system of values of Scouting are these basic values of coexistence. This is something very simple that a 10, 12 years old kid could understand when it's in a summer camp. Values of coexistence are those values that make everybody feel at home. It's not more complicated than that. The question is that cultures evolved. So the values that make everybody at home in 1920 are different than the values that make to feel everybody at home in 2013. So because cultures evolved and societies evolved, we readapt these values of coexistence, and maybe we were talking in a different way about gender, about class, about race, and we might be speaking in a different way about some other issues that now could be controversial as they were controversial in that moment. The interesting thing with these values of coexistence to me is that since the very beginning, Scouting had been very advanced, trying to break things that were already there. There is a beautiful article by Robert Baden-Powell in 1936 talking about apartheid in South Africa and saying the laws in South Africa doesn't allow us to put together the black kids, the Indian origin kids, and the white kids. But we want all of them to be in the same association because we believe that one day South African society is going to be united, and we want our kids to have the experience of being at least in the same association. In 1936, when he was writing this, in the United States of America, racial discrimination was legal. And it was going to be legal for 20 more years. So somehow these values of coexistence are in Scouting in a way that challenge our vision. When we go too much into the words, we forget on the very evident thing that we want these values to keep everybody in the same room. And this happens the same when we talk about these political implications that Steve was talking about. The idea of, well, what about when we talk about we being committed to society and we are being too political? And I think that it's beautiful also to think that we are trying to empower young people, to give them a framework of values for them to build their vision of society. It is obvious that if there is traffic of humans, if there is violation of human rights, if there is gender discrimination, if there is torture, there is no room for discussion. And we all, as human beings, know that this is violating our values of coexistence. But there are other things on the concrete that maybe are not so clear. And the association and the organization should be very careful not to invade the space of each one of our members to envision their vision of society. So I think that everything is in the same page. We are trying, basically, when we say creating a better world, to have these values of coexistence in a way that, whereas societies are evolving, our kids make their vision of what a better society is evolve. Now, the method is a radical different thing, as Dominic was saying. This is how we pedagogically work on that. But the principles and the purpose are related with the idea of this minimum thing. We want to empower young people with values of coexistence that are very, very basic.
Thanks a lot, Edward. Thank you. Kirsty, you want to answer to a question from... Okay.
We have received a question online from Sweden. So I need someone that would be prepared to come out and answer it for them. What is it that unites Scouts throughout the world? Is it the uniform, the Scout method, or maybe reach totally different? Who would like to come and answer it for the person online? Nobody?
Before, everybody was willing to talk, and now nobody is talking anymore. Thank you. Thank you.
It's definitely not uniform, as you see in the room. It's all sorts of uniform. But I would say it's the value and purpose that get us together. We have a faith, we have a belief in this value. I think this is what gets us together.
Thank you.
If you, Barry, correct? From the US.
One of you, Green's Cross, right? Okay. One of you alluded to the mathematics and said that you didn't really want to deal with the mathematics. So at the risk of glazing your eyes over, and I'm sure there are better mathematicians in the room than I, but it's a very, very apt analogy, perhaps more apt than you know. Somebody, BP, has given us 3 elements that we're dealing with. What we're dealing with here is, if you want the least common denominator, you have to take all the elements you're dealing with and you have to find the irreducible pieces, the factors. And if one of these points doesn't have any irreducible factors, then it's not supposed to be in the mix at all. So you take each one of those down to its irreducible factors. And just for mathematical fun, you say you got 2 and 3 and 5, and those all happen to be prime numbers, so you can't reduce those any further. The trick in the least common denominator is that you have to multiply them all together. And if these are all 3 factors of our system that have irreducible elements, you have to use them all to come up with the least common denominator. Now, we could debate long and hard about what the irreducible factors are, but that's really what we ought to be concentrating on. What are the irreducibles, and how do we use them all together to produce what we're trying to accomplish?
Thank you very much. Do you want to offer some last comments or views? Or we have time for the last input from Denmark.
Right. I'll stay away from the mathematics. I'm a physicist, so. But if we're a value-based organization, and I think we are, I think that's one thing we more or less agree on. Which of our values are actually so significant that some people can disagree with them. Because if we have values that you can disagree with, there will be people who disagree who will not fit into Scouting. Edward, who are the people who absolutely refuse any kind of coexistence? We want only our kind, the right kind. So yeah, it's just, I agree with what Stephen was saying, that perhaps we need to, there are places where we need to think whether we are excluding people, but we also, there is a limit because we do have values and people can disagree with these values, and that's where we set the limit. And perhaps that is the question here, where is that limit?
Thank you very much. We really need now to close. There is last comment from your side? Very, very last, because we really have to close on time to be...
I wouldn't argue with some of the comments that have been made in terms of Dominic's view of taking a systems approach. We were given a title of a session, which was the lowest common denominator. Dan's point about the highest common factor certainly appeals to me as a way of looking at this issue. What I am concerned about is that we currently use a written constitution in a way which excludes people without thinking through some of the more generic issues, that we do take it piecemeal, that taking it overall and finding words which bind us together doesn't need to compromise our values. It can strengthen them and enhance them rather than separating people and beating people up. I wouldn't disagree with you at all that actually we need to set a baseline for that. My concern is whether my question was whether that baseline is right for today's society. My second point, which I do want to emphasise, was where do we take that baseline when we're talking about taking young people on a journey? If young people are on a journey and they can't sign up to this level here, are we part of taking them on that journey to that level? Is that our mission? Is that what we're doing? Or do we say, unless you sign here, we won't take you? And that's the question, a fundamental question I think we need to ask ourselves. You know, where do we stop with young people and adults? And particularly I'm talking about young people. Where do we stop? Where's the value base for those young people that we're here to develop? And that's a really tough question to ask ourselves. I don't pretend to know the answer. I'm just interested that we, as a movement, have that debate about why we have those values, where they are, and how we can be more inclusive.
So as we said several times, this was the first step to look at the future of defining a bit better what is that we are currently doing, what is Scouting currently doing today. So I thank you all, and I invite you to please fill in the evaluation form, and I invite you to come later to the main hall for the evaluation panel. Thanks a lot.